Welcome to This Explainer. I am so thrilled you're here with us today because we are about to dive into the absolutely fascinating academic study of how international conflicts are actually solved. We hear about war, disputes, and diplomatic stalemates in the news all the time. But the actual science, the structured methodology behind building sustainable peace, is incredibly rich, and honestly, it's rarely discussed in everyday conversation.
So, looking at the state of the world, it's pretty natural to ask, can we ever truly eliminate conflict? Well, here is a massive shift in perspective straight from conflict resolution scholars. Our goal actually isn't to eliminate conflict entirely. It turns out, conflict is an endemic, totally inevitable part of human existence and evolution. Instead, the real goal is to understand it deeply and then transform violent or destructive conflicts into processes of peaceful, positive social change.
Very quickly, here's our roadmap for today. 1. The anatomy of conflict. 2. Positions, interests, and needs. 3. The conflict resolution toolkit. 4. The power of nonviolence. And 5. Real-world peace agreements. Let's get right into it.
Okay, Section 1, the anatomy of conflict. What exactly are we dealing with here? To really grasp it, we need to trace the word back to its roots. The word conflict comes from the Latin con, meaning together, and fligere, meaning to strike. So literally, a striking together. But in modern peace studies, it simply means the pursuit of incompatible goals by different people or groups. It absolutely doesn't have to mean armed warfare. It's really just the state where two parties want things that seem to fundamentally clash. Now, when a conflict does turn violent, we have to recognize that violence takes a few different forms. Johan Galtung, who is a true pioneer in peace research, drew a really stark contrast between direct violence and structural violence. Direct violence is what makes the evening news, right? It's intentional physical harm against individuals. But structural violence? That's something that harms people slowly and gradually through deeply embedded systemic inequalities. It's this permanent state of violence built right into social, political, or economic structures that deprive people of their most basic needs.
To put that into perspective, consider extreme economic disparity. When you have a situation where just 10% of adults own a staggering 85% of global assets while the remaining 90% are left to share a mere 15%, you have systemic inequality. That leads directly to poverty, starvation, and a lack of basic health care. It is essentially an invisible violence that damages human potential just as effectively as physical weapons ever could.
Moving right along to Section 2, positions, interests, and needs. We're going to scale down from macro-global economics to human behavior.
Let's ground this dense diplomatic theory with a classic, everyday example, the tree analogy. Imagine two neighbors and they are bitterly arguing over a single tree sitting right on their shared property line. Both of them claim the tree is entirely theirs. Neither is willing to budge an inch. If we just look at the surface level, this is a completely unsolvable problem. You can't exactly saw a tree in half.
And this perfectly illustrates the difference between positions and interests. Their stated position is the exact same. I want the tree. Those positions are rigid and they're totally irreconcilable. But if you dig just a little deeper into their underlying interests, you find out one neighbor says, well, I want the fruit for my bakery, while the other says, I want the shade for my patio. Suddenly, what looked like a zero-sum game is actually completely compatible. They can share the tree and both get exactly what they want.
But the science goes even deeper than interests. Scholars point out that beneath our surface-level positions and even our interests lie four fundamental, absolute, non-negotiable human needs. Those are identity, security, community, and vitality. These are the real engines driving all protracted, seemingly unresolvable social conflicts. You literally cannot bargain away someone's need for safety or their cultural identity. If those four basic needs aren't met, creating a durable peace is basically impossible.
Section 3, the conflict resolution toolkit. Now that we've diagnosed the root causes, let's look at the clinical treatments available for peace.
The crucial takeaway here is that we have three very different approaches. Conflict management merely mitigates the conflict. It's a temporary fix, like sending in peacekeepers just to separate warring parties. Conflict settlement gets the parties to a compromise, usually through pressure, but it totally ignores the underlying tension. True conflict resolution, though, that's a holistic process. It removes the deep-rooted causes entirely and restructures the relationship for long-term sustainable peace.
A fantastic way to visualize this is the conflict triangle. Any conflict is made up of attitudes, like fear or hatred, behaviors, like coercion and violence, and structures, meaning the actual political and economic systems in play. Think about it. If you only stop the violent behavior with a ceasefire, but you totally ignore the hostile attitudes or the unequal structures, that conflict is absolutely going to reignite. Transforming all three corners is non-negotiable for lasting positive peace.
And mapping this out over time gives us the life cycle of a dispute. It usually progresses from conflict formation straight into violent conflict, then to conflict transformation, and eventually peaceful social change. The holy grail for peace builders and early warning systems is to intercept things right at phase 1, completely bypass that violent second phase, and jump straight to transformation.
Which brings us to Section 4, the power of nonviolence. We're shifting from clinical diplomacy over to the philosophical realm of active nonviolence.
Just listen to this incredibly powerful quote from Mahatma Gandhi. "I object to violence because when it appears to do good, the good is only temporary. The evil it does is permanent." Gandhi viewed conflict resolution not as defeating an enemy, but as finding a mutually satisfying outcome. Nonviolence, or satyagraha, is absolutely not passive. It is a highly active method of converting an opponent rather than coercing them.
The strategy behind Gandhi's satyagraha demands immense courage. Step 1 is cultivating absolute truth. Step 2 is practicing ahimsa, or nonviolence, which is actually maintaining a positive state of love even toward an opponent. Third is embracing self-suffering, meaning you appeal to the opponent's heart by taking on the burden yourself rather than inflicting it. And finally, maintaining an unshakable faith in human goodness, believing every opponent has a conscience. The end goal is to transform both parties.
And if you're sitting there thinking nonviolence is just a limited, feel-good concept, get a load of this number, 198. That is the number of distinct nonviolent action methods cataloged by scholar Gene Sharp, from boycotts and strikes all the way to parallel institutions. It completely proves that nonviolent resistance is a highly effective, expansive, and strategic toolkit for wielding real power without physical force.
Okay, our final section, real-world peace agreements. Let's take all of these theories and apply them to historical case studies.
We'll start with the Northern Ireland conflict. This is a textbook example of how peace builders have to tackle two completely different layers simultaneously. You've got objective issues, tangible things like borders and territorial control, but baked right into those are massive subjective issues, centuries of religious labels, deep histories, and perceived victimization. You just can't solve an objective border dispute without also addressing that subjective psychological trauma.
And that is exactly why the 1998 Good Friday Agreement is heralded as such a huge success. It didn't just manage the violence, it resolved it. It satisfied the deep-seated needs of both communities by formally institutionalizing power sharing. It addressed identity, letting people identify as British, Irish, or both. And maybe most importantly, it secured majority consent through public referendums. It was an incredibly inclusive process.
We can also look at the incredibly complex dynamics between India and Pakistan. It proves that even amidst severe political tension, cooperative frameworks survive when mutual basic needs are met. The 1960 Indus Waters Treaty successfully moderated water competition. The 1972 Simla Agreement laid a blueprint for bilateralism. And even today, ongoing back-channel dialogues and civil society contacts keep pushing for peaceful, gradual resolutions.
Finally, looking at grassroots peacebuilding in northeast India, specifically Manipur, we see clear proof that local community engagement is literally just as vital as state-level diplomacy. The lessons are huge. Avoid strict preconditions for talks, ensure inclusive dialogue with all factions, not just the loudest ones, and foster civil society initiatives while simultaneously addressing structural development needs. So, we've covered the macro and the micro. The science of conflict resolution shows us that peace isn't just the absence of war, it is a dynamic, actively managed process. I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. If conflict is an absolutely inevitable part of human nature, how will you choose to transform your next dispute? Will you stay stuck in rigid positions, or will you dig deeper to find the shared human needs beneath? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, and we'll see you next time.